A nice round number of participants now. And it's a few minutes after 7, so I think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the city's Wildlife Speaker Series. Thank you for welcoming us into your home tonight. My name is Amy McPherson, and I work in the city's Natural Systems and Rural Affairs unit. Bonsoir tout le monde, bienvenue. Notre présentation ce soir est en anglais. Si vous voulez, vous pouvez utiliser la fonction interprétation dans le panneau de contrôle et choisissez français. Merci à nos interprètes. Tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube. Please make sure your video is turned off if you don't want to be seen. Your microphones will be kept on mute until the question period at the end of the presentation. At that time, we invite you to raise your virtual hand using the reaction function at the bottom of the screen, and we will take your questions in the order that they are received. Our staff will unmute your microphone when it's your turn to speak. Please remember to lower your hand once you've had your turn, or if someone else asks the same question you were going to. We are streaming live tonight from the city of Ottawa, which is built on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. La ville d'Ottawa rend hommage à toutes les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis, et leurs précieuses contributions passées et présentes à cette terre. We encourage all those listening, wherever you might be, to do the same. People and bats, sorry about that. There we go. There we go. People and bats have coexisted for a very long time in many different parts of the world. But how well do we really know them? While preparing for this event, staff had a lot of fun coming up with bat-themed puns and catchphrases. We decided not to use most of them for a couple of reasons. One, most plays on words don't really translate very well. It's a problem we've had with a few of our catchy titles. And two, they were based on the pop culture stereotypes of bats. I mean, sure, we did use some references to Halloween and, you know, campy Adam West TV shows and that sort of thing in our promotional materials because I'm a big fan of both of those things. But tonight's presentation is about real-life bats and the real-life issues that they're facing. So in honor of Bat Appreciation Week, which this is, let's learn about the bats that share our city. So please welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Christina Davy.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. I know it's pouring rain out there, so hopefully you're somewhere cozy. Just checking in that this is looking correct. Wonderful, thank you. So I work at Carleton University in the Department of Biology, and I run a conservation ecology lab. And my students and I study wild animals, and we try to understand what they do and how we as humans can better protect them. And before I start, I want to echo what Amy said and respectfully acknowledge that I am speaking to you, and I think many of you are joining from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I also want to acknowledge that the bats and the turtles and the snakes and the other species that my team work with are still here on this land because of thousands and thousands of years of care for the land by the Algonquin and other Indigenous nations, which continues to this day. So when we do work to conserve wildlife in what is now Canada, we are contributing to a long history of care for the land and its species, and it's our responsibility to do that as well as we can. Before we get started, I know some of you are probably here because you already love bats, and I recognize some of the names, and hello to the people that I already know. Some of you might not like bats. Maybe you were talked into joining this tonight, or it's pouring rain outside and you didn't know what else to do with your time, or your parents didn't like bats, or you know someone who doesn't. And honestly, that's fine. You don't have to like bats. We can disagree. But I hope that I can show you tonight how misunderstood and amazing they actually are. And so if we think about bats and common misconceptions about bats, there are two in particular that pop up again and again. And the first one is this one about hair, right? Bats get stuck in your hair. So I promise, bats do not want to be in your hair. There is nothing in your hair that is of interest to a bat. There are really cool bat hairstyles that you can rock for Halloween, like this one, but the bats are not going to fly into your hair and get stuck there. The second thing that comes up a lot is this idea that bats are blind, and they're not. They have eyes, and their eyes actually work fine, but they fly at night, right? That's the other thing everybody knows about bats that is actually true, is that they are almost entirely nocturnal. So they fly at night, and they're mostly echolocating. So they make these loud ultrasonic calls that are above our range of hearing, so we can't hear them. And they listen back for the echoes of those calls, and they use those echoes to avoid bumping into things and also to zero in on food. And some bats can echolocate through their noses, but many of them have to open their mouth to make their echolocation calls. And this leads to some interspecies misunderstanding. So bat biologists like to take pictures of bats because we think that they're beautiful. And then we show them to people, and like we'll take beautiful pictures of the bat's face and close up and zoom way in so you can see all the neat bits and show it to people. And then sometimes we're surprised when we don't get the reaction that we had when we thought that bat was beautiful. And part of this is because the bats often have their mouths open and they have these really sharp teeth, right? And so people think that they're baring their teeth at them. But in fact, in many cases, the bat's just echolocating. And it has to have its mouth open to do that. Whoops. So my take home here is that the bats flying around with their mouths open are not yelling at you. They're yelling their echolocation calls so that they can pick up the echoes and figure out where not to fly, where it's safe to land, and how to zero in on a tasty moth or two. Bats are a huge group of mammals. They make up over a fifth of all known mammal species. And the thing that's special about bats, which you already know, is that they can fly. They are the only flying mammal. So this is a big brown bat taking off after we've weighed and measured it. You can see it's got a wing band, so we can recognize it when it comes back again. It's moving its head around here, echolocating, and it takes right off and it flies away, and no other mammal can do this. Flying squirrels can glide, which is also quite cool, but it's not the same. It's not flight. So bats are the only flying mammal, and then maybe some people would mix them up with birds as a result. Bats are not birds, right? Mammals have fur, and they give birth to live young, and they nurse their young with milk. Birds have feathers, they lay eggs. Different groups despite the flight. Within the mammals, bats also get mixed up with another group of animals. They're often compared to flying mice. Bats are not mice. They are in an entirely different group that's called the Chiroptera, which means hand wing. And that name is pretty obvious. If you imagine, see if I can get this right on the video. So if I was a bat, my thumb would be sticking up free and my fingers would be elongated and there'd be a wing membrane around it. And that's how my wing would be formed. So Chiroptera, hand wing, nothing to do with mice. And it's not just their evolutionary history that's different from mice, and it's not just the fact that they can fly. It's also, other than their size, pretty much everything else about them. So mice are known for having lots and lots of babies. They can reproduce really quickly, right? They live fast. They die very quickly, they reproduce very quickly, and then their babies have many, many babies and die pretty quickly as well. Bats play the long game, so they're long-lived. They can live decades in some cases, and they have only a few young every year. So a big brown bat, like this one, will have twins, and that's the most babies she can produce in a year. And as you can see, they are huge. Little brown bats have only one pup per year, and that pup comes out at a quarter of its mother's body weight. So For those of you in the audience, you can do the math. It's a really big baby. And then that baby needs to feed on a whole ton of milk. So that big brown bat mother is going to have to fly around and eat half her body weight in insects every night to be able to produce enough milk to feed her giant pups. And then she'll take really good care of them, and they'll start to fly, and then they'll learn how to find hibernation sites. And there's a whole set of parental care in bats that's just not present in many mice. Fun fact, did you know? This is the only planet in the known universe that has bats on it. And I'm going to tell you all about bats in Ottawa, because I think that's why most of you are here. But first, I wanted to take you on a tour of the world and show you all the other amazing bats that are out there, just so you can get an appreciation of how much diversity there actually is. So there are bats on every continent except for Antarctica. As I already said, there are about a fifth of all known mammal species. So there are over 1,400 described species of bat. Some of you may remember this ad. Remember, there's an app for that. Whatever you want to do, there's an app for that. Well, almost whatever you can think of, there's a bat for that. There are little tiny bats like this eastern small-footed bat that my student Laura is holding in the picture here. There are big bats like this Livingston's fruit bat, which lives on an island in the Indian Ocean. This is one in a zoo that I had a chance to work in at one point, and as you can see, it's quite a lot bigger. You'll also notice that it's not climbing into my hair, thereby proving my point if a bat's not getting stuck in your hair. There's huge diversity in what bats eat as well. So there are bats that fish. This is a bat in the genus Noctilio, the fishing bats, and they have very long toes and very long claws on their toes. And they actually fly over water. They're echolocating, looking for ripples on the surface that indicate a fish just under the water. And then they trawl through the water with their sharp claws and grab fish right out of the water and eat them. There are a whole set of fruit bats like these ones. These are the ones people are often easier to convince when we try and tell people that bats are cute, because they look more like puppies, right? But the other bats are cute too. I will show you. So the fruit bats are eating figs and mangoes and pretty much any kind of fruit that they can find. And they're really important as seed dispersers, right? They're eating the fruit and the fruit seeds, then they fly a long way away and they poop those seeds out with a nice little packet of fertilizer, and the seeds can grow far from the parent tree. There are nectar feeding bats, which are really important in terms of pollination for different plants. And in fact, the plant that tequila is made from, the agave plant, is pollinated by a bat. Some of these nectar feeders have really wild adaptations to help them to get the nectar that the plants are producing. And so in the case of this picture, the nectar is way down at the bottom of a long tube. And this bat has an extremely long tongue. This is actually the longest tongue of any known mammal. It has such a long tongue that it needs an extra structure to roll it up at the back of its throat when it pulls it in. And in this picture, you can see that the tongue has little hairs on it, or bristles, that help the nectar to flow up the tongue and into the bat's mouth. There are lots of bats that are insect eaters. The ones that we have here are all insect eaters. And different insect-eating bats prefer different species of insects. Some of them will eat whatever they can get. Some of them do what's called aerial hawking, where they're grabbing insects out of midair. And then some of them are gleaners. So if there's an insect or a different type of arthropod, maybe a spider sitting on a surface, they'll actually fly up, use their echolocation call to detect that insect on the surface and just pick it right off again. There are bats that are carnivorous. So this is a beautiful, staged, but beautiful picture of a bat called Trichopterosus, the fringe-lipped bat. And it specializes on this frog called the Tungara frog. And it actually isn't detecting it by echolocating the frog's shape, but rather it waits for the frog to call. And so this has given rise to all sorts of evolutionary arms races between this frog and this bat, because the male frog has to call to mate, right? To attract mates and mate. And if it calls, it's vulnerable to being eaten, but it's also more likely to get mates. And so there are actually cases where a group of male frogs will take turns calling, but all stick kind of close to each other. So they're sharing out the risk of being eaten by the bat while also increasing their chances that they will either call in a mate or be able to intercept a mate who's heading for the calling male. Because it's almost Halloween, and because this is a bat that everybody likes to talk about, we also have to talk about this wonderful one. This is Desmodus rotundus, the common vampire bat. Isn't it cute? It is so cute. So Desmodus has all sorts of adaptations that lets it do what it does. And it's a vampire bat, so it does eat blood. But it doesn't attack animals to do this. Instead, it's super sneaky in its feeding strategy. So you can see it's got this beautiful little nose, and there's actually an infrared heat sensor in there. It's able to, sorry, not an infrared heat sensor. There is a heat sensor in its nose, similar to the heat sensors that rattlesnakes have. So it can actually sense body heat from mammals or birds that it might want to feed on the blood of. It doesn't jump on them and attack them and do anything violent. Instead, it sneaks up to them very quietly, and it uses those two very sharp front teeth that you can see there. And those are razor sharp. And it bites them once very quickly and then waits. And those teeth are so sharp that the animal barely feels the bite, twitches a little bit. It's like getting bitten by a bad mosquito, for example. And then it settles down again. But the next trick the bat has is that it has an anticoagulant in its saliva. So the bite starts to bleed. It doesn't particularly hurt the animal. The animal's not disturbed. It's not running away. It's just sitting there. And the blood is coming out of this tiny little wound, and the bat can just sit there and lick it up. If you think about vampire bats and stories you might have heard, you might think they're actually quite big, but they're not. This is the size of a common vampire bat. This is as big as they get. So they're more like pesky bat mosquitoes than like the scary vampire that you might have been picturing. Although there is also a bat called the false vampire bat that is quite large and specializes on birds, and it grabs roosting birds off their perches at night and eats them whole. There's also huge diversity in where bats roost. So this is where they are hanging out during the day when they're not flying around foraging or trying to find each other. So we've got bats that roost under tree bark, like the one shown here, bats that roost in caves. This is a bat called Theraptera tricolor, the sucker-footed bat. Theraptera tricolor is found in Central America and South America, and they actually have suction cups on their thumbs. You can see those in the picture up at the top there. And those suction cups help them to hold on to completely smooth surfaces. And they specialize on roosting in these heliconia leaves. Heliconia is that big green leaf that you can see in the background there, and it starts out in a roll. So it grows in this tight roll, and then the roll unfurls, and you've got this big, beautiful green leaf. And so these bats find the roll, and when the roll is big enough, they climb inside, and they use that as their little hidey hole. And then as the leaf unfurls, they go and they find the next furled leaf to roost in, and they roost in little family groups in there. And so to find these, basically walk through the forest and you look for rolled heliconia leaves, and you tiptoe up to them, and you grab the top so that the bats don't fly out, and then you have to peek in like my friend Yinyi is doing in the picture here and see if there are any bats inside. There are all sorts of bats that make roosts out of leaves. The hunter and ghost bat, the cute little white ones up at the top there, actually modify the leaves that they're roosting under themselves. So if you take a look at the picture under the white bats, you can see bite marks all up and down the central rib of that leaf. And that's where one of the bats has bitten its way up and down to make the leaf fold over and form a nice little tent that he and his harem of females can roost underneath. And then there's some bats that inexplicably like to just roost out in the open. So these proboscis bats like to roost one on top of the other in a neat little row on a tree trunk, often over the water. They can take off and find another tree trunk if they get spooked. So that's a bit of a tour of what's out there. But there are no vampire bats here, and there are no fruit bats here. So let's zoom in on Ottawa, and I want to show you who actually lives here, who's in your backyard. We have 8 species altogether. We can split them up generally by what they do in the winter, and they all eat insects. So winter is really tough because there's no food for them, right? So the bats that live here have 2 options. They can stay and tough it out, or they can go somewhere where there are insects in the winter. We have 3 species that take that second option and just leave. These are basically our snowbird bats. They're the long distance migrants because they're flying down into the States and in some cases down into Mexico and possibly even further. The eastern red bat, the silver-haired bat, and the hoary bat. And all 3 of these were recently assessed as endangered, and I'll tell you more about that in a bit. These are all foliage or tree roosters. So the eastern red bat and the hoary bat actually like to roost just hanging from clumps of leaves. And they have a few more pups than the average. So they can have 3 or 4 pups a year, and they'll hang their pups from those clumps of leaves. And then the mom will go forage, come back and nurse the pups in those safe clumps of leaves in the tree. Silver-haired bats like to roost either under bark or in cavities in trees. And again, all 3 of these are flying south for the winter. The next option is for the bats to actually stay in Ontario and overwinter here. And to do that, they have to find a site that is stable and non-freezing where they can hide out for the winter, because if they freeze solid, that's it, game over, they're dead, right? So these bats are finding caves or abandoned mines. They find a site that is not going to freeze solid. So the backs of these caves and mines typically have a temperature of 2 to 10 degrees Celsius through the winter, depending on which part they're in. And then they slow everything right down. And I know that you have all heard of hibernation before and you know what it is, and I do too. And I get really blasé about it, but when you actually think hard about what these animals are doing, it's wild. So there's this little animal, it's flying underground, finding a little site to hang itself up, and then it slows itself down so that its heart is beating a couple of times a minute, and it's breathing very, very slowly. And it makes it through the winter like that. They'll wake up a couple of times, just like when you're sleeping and you wake up a couple of times, they'll wake up, they grab a drink, they pee, they hang themselves back up again, they go back to sleep. They have to have enough fat to make it through the winter doing this. So before they go into hibernation, they eat a ton of insects and they put on a ton of fat. And when we catch them right before hibernation, they're basically like tubby little butterballs. When you catch them coming out, they're quite skinny because they've used up most of their fat during the hibernation process. Oops. I'm going to introduce you to these 5 species. And before I do that, I just want to be clear that I am aware how ridiculous the names of bats actually are. So the first bat I'd like to introduce you to is little and brown, and it is called the little brown bat. The next bat I'd like to introduce you to is also little and brown. It's called the northern myotis. And if you had one of these in each hand, you would notice that they looked almost exactly identical. The difference is that the northern myotis has a longer tragus, which is this little bit of skin or cartilage sticking up into your ear. So the northern myotis has a slightly spikier tragus, but otherwise we're looking at 2 small brown bats. There's another small brown bat. This one's called the tricolored bat. One of my team members has decided that it looks like David Bowie, but that's not maybe the best way to ID a wildlife species. If you blow on its fur so that the fur flattens out, you can see that it has 3 bands of color on its fur, and that's why it's called the tricolored bat. Otherwise, it is small and brown and looks very similar to the first 2 species. We've got the eastern small-footed bat, which is even smaller. This bat weighs in at about 3 to 4 grams. During the summer, it's tiny. It has a dark facial mask and very golden fur. And this one is really cool because it actually likes to roost under rocks. So we thought they were much rarer than they actually are for a long time because we were looking in the wrong place. We were looking in trees and we were looking in buildings and we weren't finding them. And it's because they like to roost in rock crevices or underneath loose rock. And then the last hibernating species we have here is this one, the big brown bat. When I say big, it is bigger than a little brown bat. But if I had one sitting in my hand, head to tail, it would be about this big. It's not big. So these are our 5 hibernating species, and they rely on these caves and abandoned mines that have the right conditions to get them through the winter. And then in the spring, it warms up, and the red and hoary and silver-haired bats come back from the south. And these 5 species wake up from their long winter sleep, and they all come out and feast on tasty insects again. And the female bats in particular have to eat a lot because this is when they become pregnant. So they mate in late summer and early fall. They store sperm over the winter. And in the spring, the females ovulate and become pregnant. And remember, those babies are huge. So here again is a big brown bat with twin pups, giant baby that needs lots of food. And this is where we get to the part of the talk where I start telling you what you can do to help Ottawa's bats, because there are a whole list of things that you can do if you want to help. We know that our bats need healthy insect populations to survive. And I'm using the word "are" not in a possessive way, but more in a like, it's our responsibility to do this for the bat, right? They need healthy insect populations. We know that our insects are also in trouble. And so two of the things that you can do to help are, first, to avoid using unnecessary pesticides. There will be cases where you have to use them. That's your business. I'm not judging you. I'm just letting you know that where you can minimize pesticide use, you will also be helping bats and birds. And you can make your garden or farm or backyard or balcony as insect friendly as possible. And before you worry about biting bugs, we're not talking about mosquitoes. Increasing the mosquito population isn't particularly good for bats. Mosquitoes are like kale chips. The bats need like burgers, right? They want big moths, big beetles, all of those wonderful big insects that thrive when we build pollinator-friendly gardens and when we keep our green space healthy. So the bats are out feeding, and let's say that we make sure that there are enough insects out there for them, and they need enough food to feed their giant babies. There are a number of risks that they will encounter while they're foraging, right? And one of them is collisions with wind turbines. So some bats collide with spinning wind turbines in fairly large numbers, and hoary and red and silver-haired bats are three species that, especially during their long migrations, are at very high risk of collision with wind turbines. And that's actually the reason that they have been listed as, assessed as endangered just recently. Here's the trap though. This is not a story about bats versus wind energy. And I am actually increasingly sick of seeing it being pitched that way. So we need wind energy, right? This is not a question. We're in a climate crisis. We need to fix this. And renewable energy sources like wind energy are a key tool in doing that. We absolutely need wind energy. And we need bat-friendly wind energy and bird-friendly wind energy, and we can have those things. So if we time turbine operations to avoid the migratory period and avoid low wind speeds, we can reduce bat mortality by over 90%. We have the tools to do this, and we absolutely should be aiming for bat-friendly wind energy. Groups of female bats and their pups, those maternity colonies, also need really good, safe places for the pups to be raised. And that means stable roosts that won't be destroyed while the pups are growing and before they can fly to safety. And those should be warm and dry and good places for the pups to grow. There are lots of bats that will form maternity colonies in trees. And so anytime that you can do something to preserve forest habitats, and in the city, that can be woodlot patches, that is directly helping bats. And of course, a whole suite of other species as well. But bats aren't only using trees, right? There's a whole bunch of species that like to roost in buildings. So this is just a picture of my team putting up a big mist net. So there's those two poles there and then very thin nets strung out in between the poles to catch bats that were coming out of a maternity colony in this old building. This is near Peterborough. Buildings like this are really important as maternity sites, and they're not always old, dilapidated buildings. We also find maternity colonies in very well-kept, beautiful homes where people are living, and sometimes they don't even know the bats are there. There are absolutely cases where you have to exclude bats from buildings, and that's okay. The trick is, if you don't have to, leave the bat roosts alone. And if you have to get them out, that's fine. You can do it humanely, and you can do it at the time of year when the pups are not vulnerable. So if you avoid excluding bats in June and July, then the pups will be able to fly away with their parents, and there don't have to be any dead bats involved. You can also provide new safe places for the bats to roost if you have to exclude them from a building, right? And one of these tools is bat boxes. So these aren't necessarily going to get used immediately. Often you'll put up a bat box and the bats won't come, and You'll think, oh no, what was the point? Why did I do that? But what you're doing is creating new habitat, and it's still habitat even when the bats are not directly using it. And if there's a building 4 doors down where the bats are quite happy, but then they get excluded 3 years later, they will have found your bat box and checked it out, and it will be on their mental map of new safe places that they can use. And you may suddenly find that you have a bat box full of bats. Bat boxes are a great tool in some cases. They're not a solution for all the species that live here. They're great for little brown bats. They're great for big brown bats. There's a couple other species that will occasionally use them, but the other species typically need good tree habitat instead of bat boxes. But these work really well for those 2 species. And if you have a bat box up already, or you're planning to put one up, you can also help by registering your bat box with the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Canadian Bat Box Study. So if you are interested in this, they have more information on their website, and they would love to hear from you. They've got a whole program where they're measuring temperatures inside bat boxes and trying to understand how many bats are in them. And then we get to white nose syndrome. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this threat, but I did want to give you a really quick run through the problem. So hibernating bats can get this disease called white nose syndrome, and it's called white nose syndrome because a fungus that causes the disease grows on the noses and gives them fuzzy white noses. It's pretty straightforward. It also grows on the ears and on the wings. It makes them really itchy and uncomfortable, kind of like poison ivy. And so they wake up too often while they're hibernating. And many, many bats around here died from this disease over the last 10 years, but hang in there because it gets better. So it was first observed in New York State. And I'm going to put a little arrow to that red mark there. So that's where it was first observed. And then the colors on this map are showing you spread over time as bats carried the spores of the fungus from one hibernation site to another gradually across the years and spread it across a really wide area. And you can see if you look up near Ottawa, where we are, that it's been here for a while. And so in places where the fungus was introduced, we saw over 95% declines in some species, and especially in little brown bats. It was awful. It was really, really awful. And there was conversation about potential extinction of these species. It was the biggest documented mass mortality of mammals ever. And that was horrible. And this is showing you a pile of bones on a hibernation site after white nose syndrome swept through, just to give you an idea of how terrible this actually was. But here's the good part. The bats that are still here, that have survived so far, appear to be resistant or tolerant to the disease. And we've done some genetic work. They're a little bit different on average than bats that died from the disease. And so they can pass that on to their pups. If we can help them get through the winter without waking up too often, they seem to be able to do okay. So if you stay out of those hibernation sites during the winter so that you don't disturb them more than they have to wake up anyways, that's a huge help. The other thing you can do is all of those actions we've already talked about that help bats during the summer so that they can produce more pups. Because what we have now is a very small endangered population. And although white nose syndrome is not the key threat anymore, small populations are really vulnerable to other things also. So in this case, we have an endangered population and every individual is really, really precious. And the big thing you can do to help, and I know some people here won't like this and that's okay, but I promise it's worth at least hearing. The big thing you can do to help is keep your cat inside. Cats are really good at killing bats. If you think about it, a bat is basically a glorified cat toy, right? It flutters around erratically. It does all the things you would do if you were playing with your cat and a cat toy. And cats are very, very good at bringing cats down. And there's an estimated 1.4 to 3.7 billion birds and 6.9 to 20.7 billion mammals killed by outdoor cats every year. So by keeping your cat inside, you are directly helping Ottawa biodiversity. And then finally, many people are scared of bats. And so bats get persecuted. So how can you help? Well, you can tell your friends why bats are amazing and how to help them, assuming that you agree with me, which of course you don't have to do. But also, you can be bat smart. Most people either have a story like this one or have heard a story like this one, right? there was a bat in my house, so I got out the baseball bat and they don't have very nice endings. What I want you to notice about this picture is that while he's wasting his time with the tennis racket, he's not doing the one thing the bat wants him to do. Open the darn window. The bat doesn't want to be in your house. 99 times out of 100, if you open the windows and doors, the bat will let itself out. Okay, but let's say it doesn't. Let's say somehow somebody gets bitten. Well, what then? Well, you would do the same thing that you will do if you get bitten by any other wildlife. So, first of all, try to avoid getting bitten. You're not going to pick up a cute, cuddly raccoon because it will bite you, right? And raccoons can carry diseases like rabies, just like most wild mammals can, and so can bats. So step one is don't pick them up. If you have to pick them up, if they won't leave your house by themselves, and sometimes they're stubborn because bats are stubborn, you can pick them up wearing gloves. You can use a dustpan and a Tupperware with a pair of gloves on to just scoop them up and let them outside, and you can get them outside safely that way. And finally, if a raccoon bites you, you'll know, right? There will be blood, it will be dramatic, you will go to the ER and you'll get medical care. If a bat bites you, you probably won't see anything on your skin. It'll hurt for a second. Those tiny pin-like teeth go in and out. I've been bitten by a lot of bats, so I speak from experience here. It'll hurt for a second, and then there's nothing there. You will not see a bite mark. If you or somebody you know gets bitten by a bat, you will not see anything, and you need to go talk to your doctor so that they can give you a vaccination and make sure that you are safe. So our research in Ottawa is trying to understand how the different bats of the different species are using this area and how we can work to build bat-friendly cities here and also across North America. So this is another one of the routes that we monitor. You can see we've got this funky trap set up. The bats come out, hit the little strings on the trap and fall into the bag, and then we can just pick them out. We are looking for more sites in Ottawa that we could work with. So if you happen to know of a house or a building that has bats in it, where it would be okay for us to come study them, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you know of a cave or a mine that bats use in the winter, please tell us about it. Sometimes we use these traps. Sometimes we set up mist nets like this one. This is outside a church in the Ottawa Valley. We don't hurt the bats. They don't like the experience very much, but we don't hurt them. So we catch them, we measure them, we weigh them, we give them a little silver armband that has a number stamped on it so that we can recognize them when we catch them again. Sometimes we put a little tiny tic-tac sized transmitter on their back, just between their shoulder blades. You can see the antenna from this one sticking out, and that lets us follow them around and see where they're going. And then we let them go again. So now you know why bats are incredible and why they're worth protecting and what you can do to help them. And the best part is that the things that bats really need are exactly the same things that you and I and our grandchildren or our friends' grandchildren also need. We need a healthy environment on a clean, living planet. So remember how this is the only planet in the universe with bats on it? It's also the only one with humans on it. And it is worth taking care of for the bats and also for us. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm really glad you joined tonight.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was fabulous. Some excellent photos in that, and I do love a good photo. I do have some questions that have come in the chat. And again, we would ask people, if you want to ask your question directly, which I definitely encourage, you can use the Zoom functions to, raise your virtual hand and we will call on you. But we'll get things rolling with a very interesting question that came in the chat. Someone wanted to know more about that delayed fertilization mechanism. They're wondering how they keep the sperm alive for such a long period during hibernation when their body temperature is that low. Cold storage?
That is such a good question. Yeah. So the details of how the sperm are nourished for that long are still an active area of study. And there's also, I think, outstanding questions about whether they can potentially keep them alive longer. So there are non-mammal species, like turtles, for example, can store sperm over years and are actually able to nourish the sperm and keep them viable for a really long time. And we don't know how long bats can successfully store sperm for. So I don't have a satisfying answer to that question, except that it's such a great question and a fascinating topic.
Okay. I don't think we've got any hands
I've got
raised.
one. I've got a question sent to me. Can I jump on that one while you look for next one? Is
Sure.
that okay?
And
Okay.
we did just get someone putting their hand up, so we'll get to you
Oh,
in just a
good.
moment, Christine. But go ahead, Christina.
Okay.
Ask the question that came to you.
Thanks. I have a question from Adam saying, can you speak to the relationship between bats and climate change? Which is also a really great question. Thank you.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we are trying to look at this in a variety of ways. And one of the effects that we've noticed recently is that some of the bats in Canadian populations are actually shrinking on average over time. It doesn't mean the individual bats are shrinking, but if you look at the average size of bats we did a study in Yukon, for example, where we looked at the average size of bats over a 15-year period, and the average was higher at the beginning of the study than at the end of the 15 years. And that tells us that smaller and smaller bats are constantly being added into the population. And the link to climate change there is that we found that bats that were caught after rainy periods were lighter than bats that were caught after drier periods when they could forage more, because bats can't forage well in the rain because the raindrops interfere with the echolocation and it's hard to fly when you're soaking wet and heavier. And so there's a direct relationship in Yukon between increased rainfall, which is part of the effects of climate change, and reduced body size in bats. We don't know, in theory, there's a threshold somewhere where the bats can't get much smaller without it being a problem. We don't know exactly where that threshold is. And so we've tried to extend that across Canada and see if we see the same pattern everywhere. And we do see the same pattern of shrinking bats across Canada, but the effects of weather vary in different places. So for example, on the East Coast, where it's a little bit warmer on average than in Yukon, we didn't see the same effect of rainfall, but we found that much colder periods were associated with lighter bats. So we do see these really complicated interactions, but because we don't have the ability to also measure the amount of insect prey in the air, because we don't have good data on insects, it's really hard to untangle and those different interactions, and it's really hard to predict exactly what will happen in the future as climate continues to change.
Mm-hmm. And certainly we've seen some pretty drastic impacts on some of our wooded areas and trees in the urban area from some of the increasing windstorms and ice storms as well. And I know you mentioned how important the forests and the trees are to bats, so I have to think there's a connection there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Sam, can I ask you to go ahead and call on Christine to ask her question, and then we'll go back to a question in the chat, and then we'll go to Pearl.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for a beautiful presentation, Christina.
No, thank you.
I'm wondering, I would like to donate my time to build some bat boxes in my neighborhood. I've noticed that we have a lot of bats here in Sandy Hill, and we also have a lot of old homes and construction that I'm sure there's lots of bat exclusion going on around here. So, and I've seen some really great places along the Rideau River where I can mount some bat boxes. So I'm wondering, who do I talk to get permission to install some bat boxes in my neighborhood? And if there's any grants that can help me with the purchase of some materials?
I think the permissions question is probably one for Amy.
I think I can step in on that. Yeah. If it's private property, obviously you need the landowner's permission. And equally, if you're talking about lands along the Rideau or Ottawa rivers, if it's in public ownership, of course, we have a plethora of public agencies that own land here, but the big ones are usually either the city or the National Capital Commission. And one way you can find out is to go on Geo Ottawa, which is our interactive mapping. And if you look under the land parcels layer, there is actually a sublayer, a little category you can do in a dropdown that shows public owned lands. And it has different colors for the different agencies that own the land. So if you see some that are kind of in a purple color, that's usually city. Sometimes lands along roads and road allowances don't show up as being city owned, but they generally are, except probably the river parkways, which would be NCC. So depending which agency, then we do have channels that you can come through at the city. And we certainly have had scout groups and other groups putting bat houses up in city parks and green spaces on occasion. So, I would certainly recommend, in terms of designing the bat boxes and stuff, that you look at the website that Christina showed us earlier at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. They might have some information on grants, but perhaps, Christina, you know of some more sources of funding that people might.
No, unfortunately, I don't.
Okay.
But the Canadian Wildlife Federation would be able to put you in touch if there are good options.
There is actually a city program that you might be able to qualify for. It is called the Community Environmental Grant Program. Sorry, I think I missed a letter there. Community Environmental Project Grant Program, CEPJP, kind of awkward. It does have, application deadline end of March, usually each year, and there's funds that can be given out to community groups usually, but we have had, smaller numbers of people participate. So you might be able to use that as a source of funding. You have to, of course, make a good pitch, because the competition for the funding can be fierce. But you might be able to get some funding there to help the construction materials costs, and then you'd have to go through the property leasing program. Usually is what we run through to have a bat box on city property. So if you wanted to send me an email, Christine, I can put you in touch with some people on that. Once if you figure out that the site you want to put a site or a bat box on is on city property. It's probably more straightforward if you can just deal directly with private landowners. Honestly, less bureaucratic.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I will definitely contact you.
Okay. Quick question from the chat. Do you have an infographic on the cats versus bats and birds numbers you mentioned that you can share?
Ooh, not at my fingertips right now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is there a way I can share it back through you, Amy?
Possibly. If the person asking the question, that was Nina, if Nina wants to, email into the wildlife inbox at the City of Ottawa, the one that the invitations and notifications about the series come from, then I can access that and we can hopefully connect you guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Pearl. Let's get Pearl unmuted so she can ask her question.
Hi.
Hi.
If you hear a funny voice, it's my budgie.
Awesome.
First, I want to say thank you as well. And I love bats. I rescued a couple of them. One I rescued with a towel, and they're quite intelligent. They know that you're trying to help them. And if you use eye contact, they're kind of like birds. If you use eye contact, you can sort of direct them to where you want them to go. I've also used a towel or a blanket to get rid of a squirrel that was in my apartment. I just told it where to go with my eyes and with my, just exaggerated head and eye movement. And it knew, it understood. That's just something that I learned from my budgies. That's a lot of the times how they communicate with each other. So that's what I do. And so that's another tip for people who want to try and communicate with somebody that's lost indoors. Give it a try. You'll be surprised. Capture their eyes with your eyes and direct them to where you want to go. Anyway, so I have a number of suggestions. I've been texting with Samantha, and I just wanted to share them as well, because I have no knowledge of whether this is done here in Ottawa. There was a time when I contracted down in the States, Houston, Texas, lots of nice humid weather, and lots of big bugs. And when I went for walks, and the pathways led underneath the bridge, you could see the guano. I'm not sure if I pronounced that properly.
Yeah, guano, you got it.
Guano.
Yep.
They're poops. You could see the skeletons of all these dead bugs, and it's great. And it seems that they construct their bridges kind of like honeycomb underneath, so they're bat friendly. And I every time I go, for a long time after I finished working down in the States, whenever I would bike or walk underneath the bridge, I would make a point of looking at it to see if it was bat friendly, and there weren't any bat friendly bridges that I could see. And so bridges are such good resources for bats. Put them right where the water is, and they'll be eating lots of insects. So I understand that some bats hibernate would not want to shelter on a bridge, but it certainly would provide shelter, and especially for babies, probably under bridges if they were bat friendly. So that's another big suggestion I have. I don't know if you have a comment on that, if you know of any bat friendly bridges, or if they're designing bridges for that here.
I love that you're bringing that up. I think that the bat use of bridges is a really hot topic in the United States, and for some reason it has been almost entirely ignored in Ontario.
I don't get it.
No, and it's not even just the design of the bridges. They probably are using some of the bridges that we have. They'd use them differently because, like you say, we don't have that particular sort of honeycomb design in Ontario at the moment.
Maybe
they are using them.
Describing it like I call it honeycomb, but maybe it's not. It doesn't look like a honeycomb. What I see when I go walk under one of those bridges is there's a lot of and this probably is not a structural thing. It's probably what do you call it? Aesthetic thing, and it's functional for bats. So it seems like there's a lot of slats, and they're like 1 or 2 feet long, and they're all in successive rows hanging from the bridge, and like they're solid. And they've I don't know how wide the openings are. The slats are like maybe I don't know, maybe a couple of inches, or if that. And I thought that was so neat. Such a great idea. You got them right at the water. They're eating bugs like crazy.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And so moving on to a couple of other points that I had. A couple of sites that I have noticed a few times. I just lost my chat text. Okay. So Parkdale. I used to live in that area. Parkdale, they have a lot of trees around the water there, the waterfront, and also around the buildings. I've seen them fly around at dusk. Even a neighborhood you wouldn't expect, like Alta Vista. Go for a walk, and you see the shadows of the bats. You can tell what they are. They're not birds. You can tell by their movements, and they're silent. Also, another resource for both probably funding and knowledge is the Fletcher Wildlife Garden, and that's run by the Ottawa Field Naturalist Club. They both have their own websites, so you can get in touch with them by Googling either of them, and you can get in touch with the right people. for resources. And even if they don't, I do know in the past, I used to be a member, but I'm so busy right now that I'm not a member anymore. They may help you with contacts for funding as well.
Yeah.
And I do know in the past they've bought plots of land that are I'm not sure if the club does the stewardship or another nonprofit does it. So they're really active in saving lands and stuff. And there are all kinds of degrees in that group. And there's all kinds of people that study different things. And I don't know, it's not what is the term for somebody who studies bats? Batology. I'm just making it up. But anyway, so you could find somebody like that. You can ask them, hey, who is the expert on bats? And they're a really great source of knowledge and contacts for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you're mentioning them because they are wonderful. So they have actually funded some of our hibernation survey work and have been, yeah, you're right, they're amazing.
Yeah, and they write studies as well. When you're a member, you have access to all their studies. And a couple of other random comments as you were.
Pearl, we're gonna have to go back to some of the questions in the chat soon because we've got lots of questions coming in. I really appreciate your enthusiasm.
They're not direct, so I could just leave it at that.
Okay. Thanks so much, Pearl.
Thank you.
So we had a couple questions in the chat actually related to echolocation, Christina. People wanted to know, do many types of bats echolocate, or is it only the insect-eating ones? And where are the receptors for this echolocation? Just, I would presume that's why some of them have such wonderful ear structures. But
yeah, so there are sort of two large groups of bats, and one is those flying foxes, the really cute fruit bats, right? And a group called the horseshoe bats, which are also part of that group. The horseshoe bats echolocate, the flying foxes mostly don't. And then the other big group of bats is everybody else, and they all echolocate to some extent. So most bats do echolocate. And a couple of those flying foxes that don't echolocate have developed a very basic echolocation that involves just basic clicks. And so there's all different types of echolocation spread among the bats, but most of them do echolocate. And in terms of the receptors, again, it's the ears, right? And they have all these interesting ways to get around how loud the signal they're making is and how quiet the echoes that they're trying to hear are going to be. So as an example, sometimes they basically shut off their hearing while they're making the call so they don't deafen themselves, and then switch it back on again when they're listening for the echoes. There are some bats that have a very long echolocation call, like a long constant frequency that's really effective in picking up echoes from fluttering like moths, because the echo will come back with a flutter in it and they'll be able to hear that with their ears. And there's also really neat adaptations, not just in the ear structures, because they've got these huge ears, right? Not just in the ear structures, but also in the way that they can use them. So horseshoe bats, for example, do this amazing thing. I'm pretending to be a horseshoe bat now, super professional. They do this amazing thing where their ears can go in different directions, so they can adjust the ear angle to what they're listening to. Instead of just turning their head toward the source of the sound, they're able to listen in many directions at once by just turning their ears independently of each other.
Radar dishes.
That's right.
Yeah, great. So we've got a couple questions about where to see bats in Ottawa. So someone's saying they've lived in Orleans for over 30 years and they've never seen bats flying anywhere. And where do they hang out? And Suzanne also wants to know if there's a particularly good place or time in Ottawa to see bats.
So I actually just moved my family and my lab to Ottawa in 2021. So that's a question I'm also currently trying to answer, but I think I'm going to refer those questions back to Pearl's comment that apparently they're easy to see in Alta Vista at the moment.
Now we know.
Another thing to keep in mind, though, is bat watching can be fairly unsatisfying because our bats are fairly small. They can fly very high and they come out in the dark. So there's often not much to see, even if there's a ton of activity going on. But what you could consider if you're interested is you can get bat detectors that plug into a smartphone now for like a couple $100. They are not wildly expensive, that actually detect the ultrasonic calls of the bats and translate them down to a frequency that you can hear. And when you go out with a bat detector, you realize that there are actually many bats flying around. You just can't see them because they're up there in the dark and they're small. So if this is something that you are keen on, I would encourage you to either keep an eye on field naturalist clubs that might host bat walks where somebody can come out with a bat detector and walk you through this, or consider going online and looking for cheap bat detectors that plug into your phone, because it's a really satisfying way to experience all of this activity that's going on up there that you wouldn't otherwise notice.
Great. A somewhat related question is, are there any organizations in Ottawa helping bats? Other than Carleton University, of course.
Sorry, I'm getting some really lovely suggestions directly to me in the chat about where to go in Ottawa to see bats. And I'm just going to suggest, thank you so much, folks. Can you put those in the chat directed, if you can, they direct to everyone? Is that a thing they can do? Maybe not.
I think if you send them to Samantha, she can.
Okay, or you know what? I'll read
everyone.
them out. So we've got a suggestion from Hollis, Stanley Park, Strathcona Park, parks along the river on summer and fall nights. Awesome. Charlotte is suggesting there's lots of bats on all the trails through the green belt. And I know one of, I think Nicole Nolan is on the list here too, has done a ton of bat acoustic surveys in Ottawa and was suggesting to me the other day that there are also bats calling on Carling Hill.
Carlington Hill would be a good spot for them.
And also a suggestion to look at the bog, which I think is Mare Bleu.
Mare Bleu, yeah. Okay, there you go. Crowdsourcing. So organizations in Ottawa helping bats?
Yeah, so the best answer I can give to that at the moment would be CWF, the Canadian Wildlife Federation, has a whole bat project. And they're not the only people. They are based in Ottawa, and they're not the only people helping bats. I'm putting them up front here because they're very good at working with all the other groups that are also working with bats. So if you connect yourself with CWF, you also end up in the network of collaborative bat researchers. There's also an Ontario bat working group, people working across the province, including rehabbers, who are a really important part of bat conservation that don't always get the shout outs that they deserve. And there is good bat rehab work in Ottawa as well. So I wanted to shout them out as well.
Yeah, there are at least a couple of places I think that do handle bats, which is actually the answer to another question we had come in the chat about, what to do. Someone works in a school that gets bats periodically during the winter. What should they do when they come across those bats? They ask if they can get them to use somehow. I'm not sure that that's the right answer, because we do have rehab facilities, but
it's certainly not the only answer, but we would really like to hear about those schools. And I know that that is an ongoing challenge for a lot of public schools because they're big old buildings, right? And they have the kinds of nooks and crannies that bats do like to use in the winter. So we actually would be keen to build relationships with schools that get bats frequently in the winter, because I think we can kind of help each other out. But in a scenario where you can't get a hold of me or I'm not able to help, like Amy's saying, rehabbers would be your point of contact, and you specifically are looking for rehabbers that are RVS certified, and that stands for rabies vector species. So in Ontario, rehabbers can deal with, they have to be qualified to deal with the particular species that they're taking in. And some rehabbers have gone an extra step and are able to take in rabies vector species. So that's raccoons, skunks, bats.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones that you want to look for.
Yeah, there is a listing. The province maintains a list
Yeah.
of licensed wildlife rehabbers, so you can look that up online, and you can look at it. It tells you the cities that they're in, what species they can take. Locally, I know Rideau Valley Wildlife Sanctuary can handle bats. There may be a couple of others. I don't know them all offhand, but I know I've certainly heard of Rideau Valley taking in bats that the people find over the winter, stuffing them with mealworms so that they get a nice strong start in the spring, and releasing them back into the wild near where they were found.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, they always post such fun pictures too. Okay, we've got a few people who want to know about, recommendations for how to build, where to install bat boxes, and I would say, the Canadian Wildlife Federation has excellent information on that website that you shared earlier.
Yeah, I guess I would add also that the best practices for using bat boxes are very much still being developed. And so I would just encourage anyone who wants to build bat boxes or get involved with the Canadian Bat Box Study to recognize that this is a thing that's being refined, and we can't refine it until we know how the different models work. And so when recommendations potentially shift a little bit in the next few years, it won't be because people can't make their minds up. It'll be because we're learning more about how to do it better. So for now, you want to put up reasonably dark colored boxes, but maybe not black, because you don't want them to overheat with pups inside, right? You want like reasonably dark colored boxes, usually in a south facing location if you have only one box. But what you really want to do, if you can, is put up a few boxes in slightly different places so that the bats can move depending on the temperature. And they'll use the warmer box in the cooler parts of the spring, and then they'll move into the cooler boxes when it gets hot in the summer and the warmer box starts to overheat. It's just like you moving in and out of air conditioned or heated rooms.
Excellent. Thank you. One person, Brett, wants to know if there's a species of tree that bats in Ottawa prefer for their roosts.
That's such a good question. And there have been so many studies trying to understand roost preferences in tree roosting bats. And the short answer is, it depends on what's available, and it depends on the species, and it probably also depends on the study. And honestly, if you mash all the information together, it looks like healthy, older, they don't have to be huge, they don't have to be old growth, just healthy, older trees with a variety of different species is the best way to provide what all the different bats need at the same time. So like quarry bats prefer oak trees in some studies, but then in some studies they prefer conifers. If there are big trees for them to use, they will be able to find somewhere to roost.
Okay. Nina reminds us that the Canadian Wildlife Federation actually just had a webinar on bats and bat boxes. I believe that was actually last night. We did try to make sure we were not competing directly head to head with them when we were scheduling these webinars. And I believe Nina's correct that webinar would have been recorded and probably will be posted for viewing if people did miss it. We'll be posting this one as well, but I bet they're going to get theirs up faster somehow. It always seems to take a while for us.
That's okay too.
Yeah. So let's see. Ooh, this is a technical question. Can you tell us more about the rabies treatment protocol when bitten by a bat, in terms of exposure, time for the treatment, doses, side effects, etc.? They've heard that rabies can take a while to develop after exposure if not treated, but you definitely, just speaking personally now, you definitely do not want to wait around if you have any doubt.
Yeah.
About
bats are wonderful. Rabies is terrifying. You do not want rabies, not from bat, not from a dog, not from anything. So I am going to answer the question, but I just want to qualify this with my expertise is in bats and conservation science and turtles. I am not a medical professional. Mm-hmm. So the short answer is, if you get bitten by a wild animal, you need to go seek medical advice from a qualified doctor. The longer answer is, if you've been bitten by a bat, you probably should receive a rabies post-exposure vaccination. because although it's very rare for our bats to carry rabies, they do. I have handled bats that I know were rabid because they got tested later and we found out that they were. It's very rare, but it does happen. The post-exposure shots are a series of injections that we have sort of a ways apart. They don't feel great. They don't feel that much worse than the flu shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's another vaccination. It protects you. You end up with potentially lifelong immunity against rabies, and it's really not that bad. People don't like shots, and so they come up with scary stories about it, but they're really not that horrific.
Especially
you want to do it
compared to
as
getting the actual disease.
Yes, absolutely, because
It's fatal.
by the time you start showing symptoms of rabies, it is too late for the vaccination. So then you're into treatment. There are a few cases of people that have survived acute rabies. They did not survive without neurological side effects and real consequences. So it's not something, and the treatment was not nice. I think they had to induce a coma to get them through it. So it's not something that you want to roll the dice on. So if you get bitten by a bat, the incubation time takes a while. And by a while, I mean, you definitely have 24 hours to get to the doctor. So you don't need to panic that you're not in the emergency room right now. You will be fine for 24 hours after getting bitten. It's okay. You don't want to wait longer than that. So if you get bitten by a bat and you get the bat outside and you know you need to go see your doctor, you can go to sleep without worrying about anything. You're not going to wake up rabid. But the next day, you should cancel whatever else you had and go see your doctor and get treatment before you do anything else so that you don't need to worry and you're sure that you'll be okay.
Yeah. And don't let your doctor's office tell you that the next appointment's in, 3 weeks from now. Tell them the state of affairs that you need to talk to the doctor about, that it's an urgent matter. Ottawa Public Health, of course, also has some very good information about rabies exposure, some of it specific to potential exposure from bats on the webpage. So you can also check out Ottawa Public Health as an information source on rabies and your best advice and treatment options. Again, they will recommend that you contact your health provider as soon as possible. Yeah, the next morning. Okay. Eric, or sorry, I'm not sure what the first name is, but anyway, how do we know that the metal bands and the transmitters and antennae do not impair the bat's mobility and therefore their lifespan?
Awesome question. So with the methods that we use when we're working with wildlife, we are constantly reevaluating whether they are safe and whether they're doing what we think they're doing. So in terms of the transmitters, there's a weight limits on the transmitters that we can put on the bats. So we never put anything on that weighs more than 5% of the bat's body weight. And we know that that works for them because there's been tests of bats flying with transmitters that are about 5% of the body weight that show that they're doing just fine. And in terms of that added weight, we know that it's safe because the bats are able to put on and then lose much more than 5% extra as they get ready for hibernation, and they're still able to fly. And those females are able up to a point to fly while pregnant and also fly with their pups holding onto them. So we know that they can handle a little extra weight, and that's okay. We don't put transmitters on pregnant females, and we don't put transmitters on females that are still lactating and need to be able to get back to feed their young, just to be absolutely sure that we're not causing any problems there. The bands are a slightly different question. So depending on how the bands are applied, they can cause problems, and they can be dangerous for the bats. And so it's really important that they're applied carefully, and after we apply them, that we check that they've gone on properly, and that if anything has gone wrong, we take the band off again before we let the bat go. So we had a case recently where a pair of pliers that were supposed to be the right pliers for putting the bands on actually weren't working the way that they should have been, and that was kind of terrifying for all of us because we don't want to be hurting the bats as we're doing the work. And we made sure that those pliers were not used again and that the band that was put on incorrectly got fixed. But yeah, it's always an issue with wildlife work to be sure that you're not accidentally causing harm as you try and figure out what's going on with those different species.
Yep. It's an important part of the research is to look into those, safety protocols and consider the benefits and the risks.
Yeah. And it's
Weigh them.
important to be able to recognize when something's going wrong and admit that it's not working well and change direction, because,
Yep.
otherwise you have problems.
Yeah. We have someone who would like to thank you for explaining about the different species of bats, because they always assumed that the bats they saw flying around their local park were little browns, but now they know it could be in different species, could be any number of species from what we saw. They wonder if you know what the rough percentage would be of little brown bats or, similar ones in an urban park full of trees.
It's such a good question. And no, I don't. But I really hope that 5 years from now, I will be able to answer that question for Ottawa.
Yes, there we go.
It's one of the things we're working on.
Okay. We'll all be interested. Maybe we can schedule another session and have an update. Here's a good one. What are the natural predators of bats? I know we talked about cats, but how about some of those other natural predators?
Oh, everything. They're snack size, right? So, feral cats or outdoor domestic cats are a problem, but in cases where cats are not around, weasels will eat bats, and owls will eat bats, and snakes will eat bats, and large mice will even try and eat bats. And you name it, any predator that can get its teeth into a bat will probably try.
I wouldn't be surprised if squirrels would go after babies they found in the trees.
Yep.
Because people are often surprised to hear that squirrels are nasty little predators when they get the chance,
and they sure are.
I mean, they'll rob a bird's nest, so I don't see why they'd turn up their nose at a little baby bat that couldn't fly away.
Snack size.
All right. How can industrial wind turbines be managed to be less harmful to migrating bats? Also, great presentation. Thank you, from John.
Thanks, John. So there are a couple tools, and there's a lot of ongoing work to kind of keep refining them and find a sweet spot that minimizes the impact on wind industry while also minimizing bat mortality. In Ontario, new wind operations have to do post-construction monitoring for 3 years after the wind turbine starts spinning, and that just entails ecological consultants going out and counting dead bats under turbines so that the operators can understand which of their turbines are having an impact, if any. Where an at-risk bat gets killed, that triggers a particular set of mitigation. And if a certain number of bats gets killed, that can also trigger particular mitigation. And the mitigation usually is that they change what's called the cut-in speed on the turbine. So this is going to sound really technical, but just bear with me. I'll try and make it clear. The cut-in speed is the wind speed at which the turbine starts producing electricity. We get more bat mortalities because there's more bat activity when the wind speed is low. When the wind's blowing really hard, the bats are not flying as much, and we get much less mortality. But when the wind's blowing really hard, that's also when the turbines are more efficient. So when a turbine is killing bats and we want to reduce mortality, we can just change the cut-in speed on the turbine so that it doesn't start until the wind speed goes up to a level where the bats are usually not flying. The turbine starts spinning at a higher wind speed, it's less likely to kill bats. The problem is the cut-in speed is the speed at which the turbine starts to produce electricity. And when that policy was written by the provincial government, there was an assumption that cut-in speed would mean the speed the turbine starts spinning at. But that's not always what actually happens. Sometimes the cut-in speed gets changed, but the turbine's still spinning at the lower wind speed. So it's not producing electricity, but from the bat's point of view, it's still a whirling blade of death, right? And it can still hit the bats. So when that increased cut-in speed policy is applied effectively, we can get like 90% mortality reductions. When it's not applied effectively, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question. Okay.
Okay, great. The next question is, do they hear each other's echoes when they're all flying around?
Great question. They do. And I'm going to jump from there in a second to this related question that I got about
good.
whether some prey of bats can hide from the echolocation of bats. So the bats can hear each other's calls. They've got their echolocation calls, and they also make social calls while they're roosting and while they're flying that are just communication, right? And they can hear each other's echolocation calls. And there's some evidence that they can kind of listen in on each other's echoes as well to try and compete for prey in some cases.
Oh,
So they'll chase the same moth, for example, or that they'll alter their echolocation calls to sort of be territorial and warn each other off to their area. They can also recognize each other by their echolocation calls. So they have slightly different tones, the same way that we can recognize each other's voices. Individual bats can recognize their roost mates by their echolocation calls. And then if I jump from there to Julianne's question about bats or some prey hiding from the echolocation of bats, sort of. So there are a group of moths that have evolved basically ear structures that can detect the echolocation calls of bats. And when they hear an ultrasonic noise, they go into basically a chaotic free fall. And you can get moths to do this at a street light if you jingle car keys. Part of the noise the car keys makes you can hear, but part of the noise the car keys makes are way up in the ultrasonic register. And some of the moths won't budge. It doesn't bother them. They keep flying around the streetlight. But some of those moths have ears that can hear the ultrasonic noise, and they will start just dropping. And that's a strategy that they use to get away from bats.
goodness. We're going to have a whole bunch of people out there jingling their keys under the streetlights any day now. Well, maybe next summer when the moths are back. That's a new family activity for the evening walk. There we go.
Car key jingling? Yep.
Oh, fun question. What's your favorite type of bat and why?
Oh, do I have to pick one? That's weird. I think I'm going to go for a big brown bat because they are totally underappreciated and they are so cool. And I want to go back to something that Pearl was saying. So big brown bats do this amazing and hilarious thing where they're super bitey when you catch them. Like they do not want to be caught. They do not want to be handled. They want nothing to do with it. They just try to bite everything they can bite. And then you get them out of the nets and they're still biting. And then you measure them and they're cranky and they're still biting because they don't like it. And then you go to release them and you've got the bat in your hand and they're cranky and they're wiggling and they're biting. And you go like this and the bat's sitting on your hand and it's ready to fly away. And they just sit there. They look around and you can see them thinking, oh, all right, well, you're clearly not going to kill me. This hand is kind of warm. Maybe I'll just sit here and they'll just sit here for minutes sometimes before they decide to fly away. It's like, well, you're not handling me anymore and I'm clearly fine. So they're great.
They're like little cats.
Yeah, they're really smart.
Yeah, they're very oppositional. It's like, oh, you want me to go now?
Yeah.
No.
No, I'm just going to sit here.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Oh, well, we've got a nice little tip here that the Friends of Hampton Park, who have a Facebook page, have hosted bat outings at least twice this year. And
Nice.
Those are open to all. So check out their Facebook page, I guess, if you want to go on a guided bat walk.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Gypsy moths. This is a question from Jennifer. Gypsy moths, now known as spongy moths, actually. That name has been officially changed because of some negative connotations, although I still have to remind myself to use the new name because I grew up calling them by the other name. So spongy moths have become an issue for some trees due to the leaves, of course, getting devoured by the larvae. Is the spongy moth part of the diet of any of the bat species in Ottawa? Of course, it's a little tricky because only the males fly. So I don't know if any of them should go for the females.
So the bats, when there's a spongy moth infestation and there's that big defoliation event, what we think is happening is that the bats can pick up and move if they don't enjoy the defoliation. Mm-hmm. Unless they have pups that have just been born and have just become too big to carry, they can probably pick up and move to a neighboring patch. And those defoliation events, even when they're widespread, are usually pretty patchy. So there's usually some space that they can move into. But the thing that I'm most fascinated about with spongy moths is this extra pulse of food that they create, right? So you can imagine a scenario where a bat could move over into a not defoliated patch for roosting, but then as this pulse of extra food emerges, move back into the defoliated area and just eat its heart out, right? And we think that they will eat spongy moths, but there hasn't been a ton of work on that yet.
Okay. I think I've been staring at my screen too long. My eyes are getting tired.
I know, right?
So
Me
pardon
too.
me if I might stop sharing my screen for a moment. Some of the next questions, and thank you. Some of the other suggestions being sent in about, where and when to look for bats, dusk, of course, being the best time because we can still kind of see as they start getting active. Sandy Hill, Parkdale, Alta Vista, all good places. So, okay, we've got just a couple more questions. Oh, a couple more about the wind turbines. Nina was wondering if we can discuss the threat of barometric pressure from the turbines. And Pearl wanted to know whether the bats collected at the bottom of the turbines is done before sunrise, because as with birds hitting building windows, injured and dead bats and birds would be predated or scavenged, and therefore the numbers would be skewed if you wait too long.
I'm going to go in reverse order and start with Pearl's question.
Sure.
So absolutely, that is an issue. And so scavenger removal trials are built into the post-construction monitoring guidelines. So there's the team that goes out and looks for the bats. Some of those people will be better at finding them than others. So for example, if I was to go out with my team and look for dead bats on the ground, everybody would find more than me because I'm terrible at spotting small brown things on clutter. And so if you wanted to know the actual number of dead bats under the turbines, you'd have to adjust not only for how many were scavenged before you found them, so how many a raccoon came and took away, but also for variation in detection among observers. So there's the team that goes and looks for the bats, but then there's also a team working alongside them that places carcasses for them to find. So they save the carcasses they find, and then they get put out again. And that team records how many of those carcasses get found by each observer, and they can correct each observer's count to make up for the ones that they probably missed. And then they also put out carcasses and keep track of how long it takes them to get scavenged, so that they can also correct at each site for how quickly the local raccoons or skunks or weasels are removing the dead bats. So they're able to adjust the estimates for both of those kind of sources of error. And then going back to Nina's question about barotrauma. So just so we're all on the same page, barotrauma is basically what happens to your lungs if you move really quickly from a high pressure to a very low pressure zone or vice versa. And it's the effect that happens if you dive too deep too quickly, right? And the extra pressure damages your lungs, or if you come up out of the deep water too quickly, or if you climb up Mount Everest too quickly, right? And the air pressure gets lower and you suddenly struggling to breathe properly because your lungs can't catch up to the change in pressure. And so when wind turbines are spinning really quickly, they actually create a low pressure zone right around the spinning turbine blades that's different than the airspace farther out around the turbines. And when a bat or a bird flies through that pressure change, it can have a real impact on their lungs. It doesn't affect the birds as much because bird lungs are very simple. They're basically just like balloons, simple sacs. But bat lungs are like ours, and they have all these little alveoli, and they don't deal well with sudden pressure changes. And so some of the bats found under turbines are collisions. They flew into the blade, or the blade hit them as they were flying. And some of them were knocked out by barotrauma. Their lungs collapsed in midair, and they were just knocked out of the air that way.
Wow. Okay, good to know. Charlotte would like to know whether electric vehicles, lights, or other types of development that produce high frequency sounds affect the echolocation. So basically ultrasonic noise pollution.
Jamming signals. So if there's enough high frequency sound overlapping the frequency the bat is calling at, yes, it can make it difficult for the bat to echolocate effectively. But in many cases, the bat's call, because it's very directed and very loud, is still going to work around most of the sources of high frequency noise that we'd have in the city. Where there are exceptions, we don't know if the high frequency sound is affecting the bat's echolocation such that they can't functionally echolocate, or if they just really don't like it and it's annoying, and so they go somewhere else where it's quieter. There have been lots of studies of the effects of noise on bats, especially in urban areas. Some of them have been a bit inconclusive. And so what we know so far is, yes, sometimes noise is a problem for some species, but some species are better able to tolerate it and seem to do fine in cities. And we also have evidence, like anecdotal evidence, for example, from the bridges that Pearl was talking about in the US, where bats roost very, very happily, and they're roosting under traffic. Those bridges are not quiet, right?
It's very noisy environment.
It's very noisy, right? And so it's not that all noise is a problem, but we do know that for some species of bat, noise is a deterrent, and they won't roost where it's super noisy.
Mm-hmm. I wonder whether they're also fooled by jingling car keys.
In my experience, no. We're actually hoping to run some proper experiments over the next few years to test the effects of light and noise specifically on the species that we have here in Ottawa, so that we can offer some more satisfying conclusions and better recommendations for noise pollution management.
Excellent. I would just add on to that, is light pollution an issue for bats?
It's the same answer. Some species, yes, some species don't seem to mind it. Mm-hmm. And it depends. So light is complicated because there are different types of light, right? We produce artificial light at night in all sorts of different wavelengths. And so, for example, the old school high sodium street lamps were probably not much of a problem, and in some cases actually attracted insects that then attracted the bats, and they sort of came to feed at this amazing buffet concentration of insects, right? Yeah. But the LED lights that we're switching to now, although they're more efficient, also create a much brighter, whiter light. Yeah. And many bat species seem less content to forage in that light than they did in the sort of yellower light that we used to use. Yeah,
little too harsh.
Yeah.
For them. And I know, just personally speaking, I always did rather like the nice soft orange glow of the
me too.
The older sodium lights, but apparently there is a significant energy savings to be had. Yeah. So maybe we just need some colored filter or something on them. But I'll see if I can talk to the infrastructure guys, but I don't know how far I'll get on that. Great. Well, that's all the questions that I have in the chat. Sam, well. I presume you'd have passed on any more to me if you had them.
Yep, that is correct. None more to pass on.
Okay. Well, then I think that has been a fabulous presentation and Q&A session by Dr. Davy. And I'd like to, offer my sincere appreciation for spending your evening with us tonight, and to all of our attendees who spent their evenings listening and asking such excellent questions. And we look forward to having another session sometime in the spring. We will, of course, email everyone on our mailing list and let you know when that's coming up. If you're not on the mailing list, go ahead and head over to the Wildlife Speaker Series page, and you can find the email link to get onto that mailing list. And we will be happy to include you. And again, thank you very much, Christina, for the slides and the talk this evening. It was great. And I look forward to hearing the outcome of your research over the next several years, particularly as it helps us to know where our species at risk bats are in the city, what sorts of things they need, what do we need to protect, when we're reviewing development applications and when we're planning our city and our own city projects.
We really look forward to working with you on that.
I know. It's so exciting, the potential for finding some of these answers to the questions that we've been asking. And, you know, as I say, trying to improve as we go as a city. And I do thank, again, all of the attendees. I'm sure I'm going to be hearing from some of you, because I know we did say we had some follow-up questions and information to get to you. So we'll look forward to having a quick email exchange on that. And I will wish everyone a good evening. Happy Bat Appreciation Week. And we'll look forward to a happy Halloween at the end of the Bat Appreciation Week.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Yes. Thank you all.